laid on the table. The unfinished business is on the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 4251 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 369, H.R. 4251, a bill to authorize, enhance, and reform certain port security programs through increased efficiency and risk-based coordination within the Department of Homeland Security and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Mr. Speaker, I request the ayes and nays.
The ayes and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the ayes and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the ayes and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
The rule vote agreed to now, so the House moves on to moves the contempt resolution forward. There'll be an hour of general debate on the resolution and then several procedural motions before the vote on final passage this afternoon. Votes now on the first of two suspension bills debated yesterday dealing with port security. These are both 5-minute votes. As these votes are underway, remarks now from Tea Party members earlier today reacting to the Supreme Court's 5-4 decision upholding the health care law.
They're on their way. Okay. Thank you all for coming. My name is Michelle Bachman. I'm a member of Congress, and I'm proud to represent the 6th Congressional District of Minnesota. I was just seated in the Supreme Court chamber as I heard the decision come down. We had a brief reaction before. We've invited members of the Tea Party caucus to come and begin to give their thoughts to you today. Others are making their way over from the Capitol, and we'll begin this morning with the very first reaction from Sandy Adams of Florida. Sandy, if you'd introduce yourself and your district.
All right, Sandy! Hi, I'm Sandy Adams. I'm from Florida's 24th District, Central Florida area. And while I'm very disappointed, it just makes me more resolved to continue the fight to repeal this legislation. This has done nothing more than to raise your health care costs, put government in between you and your doctors, and it is impeding our businesses from hiring people. This legislation must be repealed, and I am committed to doing just that.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Landry. I represent Louisiana's 3rd Congressional District. And I can echo it. I'm proud to be here with Representatives Michelle Bachman, Blake Farrell, and Sandy Adams, and Steve Scalise. And I will tell you that at the end of the day, our founders relied on one group to solve our problems. It wasn't the Supreme Court. It was we, the people.
That's right.
And the people, it's time for the people to speak up and demand that Congress repeal this law, limit this federal government, and solve the problems that have been ailing this country over the last 30 years. And so my commitment to you and to the people is that I will continue this fight and ensure that we repeal this damaging legislation that now knows no limit to the federal government's power. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Blake Farrell from Texas, and I think Jeff had it exactly right. The final check on the power of the government is the people. If you object to this law, if you object to the continuing overreach of the federal government as we take more and more of your money away, as we take more and more of your rights away, it is up to you to elect the people to put a stop to it. People like the representatives you have here, people all throughout this country who are committed to less taxes and more freedom. Our forum for the redress of our grievances is ultimately the ballot box. It is up to each and every one of you in November to go out, exercise your right to vote, and say no to laws like this takeover of health care, this invasion of the doctor-patient relationship, and this new tax that has been mysteriously created by the Supreme Court. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is Congressman Steve Scalise from Louisiana's 1st District. Clearly, I'm disappointed in the Supreme Court's decision today. One thing they did that we said all along was that the individual mandate was not constitutional under the Commerce Clause, and they at least limited Congress's ability there. But they went further and allowed it to stand under the tax laws. And I think one thing that the Supreme Court did confirm today is that President Obama broke his word to the American people, because consistently for years now he has said that this was not a tax. The Supreme Court today confirmed, in fact, this is a tax, a massive tax increase on American families, middle-class families, the very people President Obama said he wouldn't tax. And so it confirms that. But I'm more resolved than ever to go back and go to work to repeal this entire law. I'm on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. We'll be having hearings starting next week to go back to repeal this law, to fix the things that are broken. And remember, Obamacare promised to lower health care costs. It's been confirmed now to increase health care costs. It's actually made problems worse. We need to fix the real problems in health care to lower costs, to increase access. And Obamacare made that worse. And the final thing I'll say is, look, the U.S. Supreme Court had their say here on the last Thursday in June. The American people are going to have their say on the first Tuesday in November, and that was... Support sunglasses for dogs! Yeah! Sunglasses for dogs, Congresswoman!
Thank you. I'm Congressman John Micah from Florida. You know, it's been said the power to tax is the power to destroy, and today a lot of destruction was done by this decision. I'm concerned about two things. First, the impact on our senior citizens. This is probably the most devastating blow to American senior citizens, who will have $500 billion cut from Medicaid, Medicare, and they will also limit the choices of our seniors, both for care and also their choices as far as freedom in this country, which individual freedom is being destroyed not only for our seniors but also for our citizens under this decision. The second thing, as a business person, this is a death knell for business in this country. Small businesses has been reeling from just the thought of this going into effect. Today's decision will do more to hurt our economy than anything we could do in Washington, in the state houses, or across this country. So this is a bad day for business, it's a bad day for our senior citizens, and it's a bad day for America, and Congress needs to repeal this now.
Thank the members who are just a small sample of the Tea Party caucus in Congress. We have a very large contingent of members of Congress, and they're all engaged in many things. They're all reacting to this unprecedented decision. But there's just a few things that we want to say. As a result of the President's trillion-dollar stimulus program, and as a result of Obamacare, all across the United States, spontaneously, you saw Americans attending, some for the first time, town hall meetings of their member of Congress. That was in August of 2009. They stood up and they held their member of Congress, their senator, accountable for what happened with Obamacare. The people were not happy. And we saw...
The nays are 21, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 4005 as amended, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar number 352, H.R. 4005, a bill to direct the Secretary of Homeland Security to conduct a study and report to Congress on gaps in port security in the United States and a plan to address them.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill as amended? So many as in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative. Gentleman from Arizona.
Speaker, can I ask for yeas and nays, please? Recorded vote.
Are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
We will have more reaction for you on the health care decision today in just a moment. Again, House leadership has set a July 11th date for debate to repeal the health care law. And, of course, you'll be able to watch it all here on C-SPAN. The final vote in this series is another dealing with port security, sponsored by Congresswoman Hahn of California. Quick clarification, debate on the contempt of Congress resolution against Attorney General Eric Holder will be 50 minutes, not an hour, as I said earlier. That'll be followed by several procedural motions and then the vote on final passage this afternoon. So 50 minutes of debate, not an hour. Remarks now from Connecticut Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro earlier today. She spoke to us, reacting to the Supreme Court's 5-4 decision upholding the health care law.
On the line with us right now from Capitol Hill is Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro of Connecticut, a Democrat. Ms. DeLauro has been very involved in health care issues and in particular of women's health care issues. Well, Congresswoman, thanks for being with us. But first, your overall reaction to the Supreme Court's ruling today.
Well, I mean, this really is a victory for the American people. I will just say that I thought that they wouldn't overturn it. I just didn't see how, that they would, that would find that it was unconstitutional in their efforts. So it's a real victory for the American people, and I think that what we're going to see now that. And the parts of it, and you mentioned my own interest in women's health, but this is so significant for women and for families that I think it's extraordinary. Women will, there's no longer the issue of being denied health care because of cesarean section, because of being a victim of violence. The big issue there is gender rating. Insurance companies can no longer say just because you're a woman you're going to pay 48% more for your health insurance. Children can no longer be denied coverage due to pre-existing condition. And then we've got this whole battery of preventive services that are in here. Screenings for mammography, for cervical pap smears, colonoscopies, the issues on domestic violence. I mean, this is a transforming piece of legislation. I believed that when I voted for it 2 years ago, and it's one of the proudest votes I have ever cast. Because I believe, as I did then and I do now, that this legislation has the ability to transform people's lives, which has been so critically important for health care. It makes quality health care available, affordable, and accessible for people today. And I'm particularly pleased about the opportunities that we had. The menu labeling portion of the bill is a piece of legislation that I had, which now has your calories are going to be listed on menu boards all across the country, the transparency, the summary of benefits, so people know what kind of coverage they're going to get. They are not at the mercy of the insurance company or anyone else. They've got the material inside a black box so that they know what kind of coverage that they are going to get. This is helpful to millions of families today. And I was proud then, as I said, and I am proud today.
Congresswoman, are there no aspects? We've had Democratic supporters of the bill who have described it as not perfect. Are there aspects of the legislation that you would like to get back in and fine-tune in any way?
Look, I think as with a piece of legislation that is with the scope of this kinds of legislation. Look, if you go back and look at where, Social Security, I mean, the Social Security we have now, it was not exactly the way it was done when it was first passed. It is a dynamic document in which you keep moving forward as you work to implement it, and you find out what in fact is working and what has to be more fine-tuned. That is the way legislation works, and particularly with the scope of this legislation, which is sweeping.
We heard this morning from Congressman Peter Welch in Vermont about Vermont's own work with a statewide insurance exchange. What's happening, a healthcare exchange? What's happening in your home state of Connecticut?
Well, in Connecticut, yeah, they are, working to implement the law and to put the exchange in place. We have in the interim set up, the high-risk pool, and did and the decision on that helps to move us forward in dealing with the implementation and in exchange. And there, look, people are going to be able to make a selection as to what insurance, meets their needs. And those people who have insurance and are perfectly happy with it today, that just stays in place.
Let me ask you about the politics for the fall campaigns. How do you see this playing out politically?
Well, look, I just think that the court made a determination and a decision that is now, it really is the law of the land. We have to work at implementing it. I think what's going to be played out during the election is the creation of jobs and the economy, and that's what we ought to be focused in on now. That's what we should have, not lose sight of the fact. And as I think as the health care bill has been being implemented and will continue to be, more and more people understand how important it is to their lives and the lives of their children. But the election, I believe, will continue to hinge on what we do about jobs and putting people back to work.
Last question for you. The Majority Leader has suggested that there will be a vote on repeal on July 11th, just a short time from now. Do you see that effort to repeal having any traction?
Well, look, I mean, I think I sit on the Appropriations.
Rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. Would members please take their conversations from the floor, clear the well and the aisles. You want to take it?
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise?
Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows.
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The House will be in order. I'd ask members on the minority side to take their conversations off the floor. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Raising a question of the privileges of the House. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has interfered with the work of an independent agency and pressured an administrative law judge of the National Labor Relations Board by compelling the production of documents related to an ongoing case, something independent experts said could seriously undermine the authority of those charged with enforcing the nation's labor laws, and which the House Ethics Manual discourages by noting that federal courts have nullified administrative decisions on grounds of due process and fairness towards all of the parties when congressional interference with ongoing administrative proceedings may have unduly influenced the outcome. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has politicized investigations by rolling back long-standing bipartisan precedents, including by authorizing subpoenas without the concurrence of the ranking member or a committee vote, by refusing to share documents and other information with the ranking member, and restricting the minority's right to call witnesses at hearings. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has jeopardized ongoing criminal investigation by publicly releasing documents that his own staff has admitted were under court seal. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has unilaterally subpoenaed a witness who is expected to testify at an upcoming federal trial, despite long-standing precedent and objections from the Department of Justice that such a step could cause complications of a trial and potentially jeopardize a criminal conviction. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform is engaged in a expression of confusion through the use of repeated incorrect and uncorroborated statements in the committee's fast and furious investigation. Whereas the chair of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform has chosen to call the Attorney General of the United States a liar on national television without corroborating evidence, and has exhibited behavior which could result in jeopardizing an ongoing committee investigation into Operation Fast and Furious. Therefore, it be resolved that the House of Representatives disapproves of the behavior of this chair for interfering with ongoing criminal investigations, insisting on a personal attack against the Attorney General of the United States, and for calling the Attorney General of the United States a liar on national television without corroborating evidence, thereby discredits to the integrity of the House.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the Majority Leader or the Minority Leader as a question of the privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the Chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of the resolution noticed by the gentlelady from Texas will appear in the record at this point. The Chair will not at this point determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution. What purpose the gentleman from California rise?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Report Number 112-546.
The clerk will report the title of the report.
House Calendar Number 140, report to accompany resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Eric H. Holder, Jr., Attorney General, U.S. Department of Justice, in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform.
Pursuant to House Resolution 708, the report is considered read. For what purpose does the gentleman from California, Mr. Isis, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 711.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 711, resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Eric H. Holder, Jr., Attorney General, U.S. Department of Justice, in contempt of Congress for refusal to comply with a subpoena duly issued by the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform.
Pursuant to House Resolution 708, the resolution is considered read and shall be debatable for 50 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the Chair and Ranking Member of the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform or their designee. After debate on the resolution, it shall be in order to consider a motion to refer it, if offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, or his designee, which shall be debatable for 10 minutes, equally divided and controlled by the proponent or an opponent. The gentleman from California, Mr. Issa, and the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, will each control 25 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days within which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material into the record for both resolutions made in order under the rule.
Without objection, so ordered. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognize myself, or yield myself, 2 minutes.
The gentleman is recognized for 2 minutes. The gentleman will suspend. The House will be in order. The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I never thought we would be here today. I never thought this point would come. Throughout 18 months of investigation, through countless areas of negotiations in order to get the minimum material necessary to find out the facts behind Fast and Furious and the murder of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, I always believed that in time we would reach an accommodation sufficient to get the information needed for the American people, while at the same time preserving the ongoing criminal investigations. I'm proud to say that our committee has maintained the ability for the Justice Department to continue their ongoing prosecutions. Neither the majority nor minority has allowed any material to become public that could compromise that. However, the facts remain. Fast and Furious, the Department of Justice permitted sale of more than 2,000 weapons that fell into the hands of the Mexican drug cartels was both reckless and inexcusable, and it clearly was known by people, both career professionals and political appointees, from the lowliest member on the ground in Phoenix to high-ranking officials in the Department of Justice. But that's not what we're here for today. Today, we're here on a very narrow contempt, one that the Speaker of the House, in his wisdom and assistance, has helped us to fashion. Let it be clear, we still have unanswered questions on a myriad of areas related to Operation Fast and Furious. But today we are only here to determine, over the 10 months from the time in which the American people and the Congress of the United States was lied to, given false, literally the reverse, statement that no guns were allowed to walk, during that 10 months before the Justice Department finally owned up and recognized that they had to come clean, that in fact Fast and Furious was all about gun walking, the Department of Justice maintained a series of documents. Many of these documents are believed to be communications between and with the very individuals at the heart of the decision to go forward with Fast and Furious. Therefore, we have focused our limited contempt on those documents. If our committee is able to receive the documents in totality that show who brought about the dishonest statement to Congress and who covered it up for 10 months, we believe that will allow us to backtrack to the individuals who ultimately believed in Fast and Furious, facilitated Fast and Furious, and ultimately made it responsible for Brian Terry's death. I yield myself an additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
I won't read everything that's in my opening statement. I will read just one more thing. These words were said on the House floor in 2008 when Speaker Pelosi supported contempt. She said, "Congress has a responsibility of oversight of the executive branch. I know that members on both sides of the aisle take the responsibility very seriously. Oversight is an institutional obligation to ensure against abuse of power. Subpoena authority is a vital tool of that oversight." Speaker Pelosi, 2008. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman from Maryland is recognized for as much time as he may consume.
Today, Mr. Speaker, is a historic day in many ways. On the one hand, in a landmark decision by Chief Justice John Roberts, the Supreme Court upheld the health care bill, ensuring that millions of American families will finally have access to effective and affordable health care. On the other hand, the Republican leaders of the House of Representatives are about to plunge into the history books as some of the most extreme and partisan ever. Rather than working together in a bipartisan way to create jobs and help our nation's economic recovery, they are rushing to the floor under emergency procedures with a contempt resolution that is riddled with errors and motivated by partisan politics. When I first heard about the allegations of gun walking at ATF, I was outraged. I fully supported our committee's goals of finding out how it started, how it was used, and how it may have contributed to the death of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry. I made a personal commitment, which I will keep, to the Terry family to conduct a responsible and thorough inquiry. But today's contempt vote is a culmination of one of the most highly politicized and reckless congressional investigations in decades. After receiving thousands of pages of documents from the Justice Department, conducting 24 transcribed interviews, and hearing testimony from the Attorney General 9 times, here are the facts. First, the committee has obtained no evidence that the Attorney General authorized, condoned, or knew about gun walking. Chairman Issa admitted this just yesterday before the Rules Committee. We've seen no evidence that the Attorney General lied to Congress or engaged in a cover-up. We've seen no evidence that the White House had anything to do with the gun-walking operations. Chairman Issa admitted this on Fox News Sunday this past weekend. Democrats wanted a real investigation, but Chairman Issa refused 10 different requests to hold a hearing with the director of ATF, the agency that ran these misguided operations. Let me say that again. During this entire investigation, no member of the House has been able to pose a single question to the head of ATF at a public hearing. How could you have a credible investigation of gun walking at ATF and never hold a single hearing with the leadership of the agency in charge? The answer is you can't. Based on the documents, we now know that gun walking, in fact, started in 2006. Yesterday, Chairman Issa said this about the misguided operations during the Bush administration, and I quote, "They were all flops. They were all failures," end of quote. The committee has obtained documentary evidence that former Attorney General Mukasey was personally briefed on these botched interdiction efforts during his tenure, and that he was told they would be expanded. Chairman Issa refused to call Mr. Mukasey for a hearing or even for a private meeting. During our committee's year-and-a-half investigation, the chairman refused every single Democratic request for a witness. Instead of taking any of these reasonable steps as part of a credible and even-handed investigation to determine the facts, House Republican leaders rushed this resolution to the floor only 1 week after it was voted out of committee. In contrast, during the last Congress, House leaders continued to negotiate for 6 months to try to avoid contempt in the United States Attorney's investigation. Mr. Speaker, some of my colleagues on the other side seem almost giddy about today's vote. After turning this investigation into an election year witch hunt, they somehow convinced the Speaker to take it to the floor. And they are finally about to get the prize they have been seeking for more than a year, holding the Attorney General of the United States of America in contempt. They may view today's vote as a success, but in reality, it is a sad failure. A failure of House leadership, a failure of our constitutional obligations, and a failure of our responsibilities to the American people. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Maryland reserves. The gentleman from California.
The gentleman from, well, I'll leave his statement where it lay. I now yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, the distinguished Congressman Meehan, a former U.S. attorney in that district.
The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this is not about politics, though there are some if they want to suggest that it is, because if they yell loud enough and long enough, it'll deflect the truth of the matter. And frankly, it's not about gotcha. As a former prosecutor myself, the Attorney General personifies the pursuit of justice, and I want to see him do well. But it is about accountability. Agent Brian Terry is dead, protecting our border, and 563 days later, the Terry family still does not know why it occurred. What they do know is that the very agency that initiated Fast and Furious, the Department of Justice under Attorney General Eric Holder, called the operation fatally flawed, and then the wagons got circled. It's about the separation of powers. As uncomfortable as it may be, at times it's a fundamental tenet and a strength of our democracy that Congress is given not just the power, but the responsibility to exercise its duty of executive over the oversight over the executives, especially when, by their own admission, things have gone glaringly wrong. Because the Justice Department has stubbornly resisted the legitimate inquiries of Congress over Operation Fast and Furious, there's so much we do not know. But because whistleblowers within the Department of Justice were outraged at the mischaracterizations, there's a great deal that we do know. What we do know is that we have been dealing with a systematic effort to deflect attention away from the decisions and the determinations that were made at the highest levels of the Department of Justice, where information was brought directly to individuals at the highest level of the Department of Justice, information that was contained in wiretap affidavits that lay out in explicit detail the matters related to Fast and Furious. Mr. Speaker, there is a famous quotation in the Department of Justice about the responsibility of the Attorney General not being to win cases, but to assure that justice is pursued and retained. Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent and a responsibility on this House to do what is required to do in this circumstance and to support the request that we be given the documents to obtain the facts that will allow us to draw the conclusions which I believe will allow us to get to the bottom of this level. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Speaker, I yield the distinguished gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those bringing this contempt vote say they want to talk about gun walking and how to stop it. Okay, let's have that conversation. They say they want to stop gun trafficking and keep our ATF agents safe. Well then, let's properly fund the ATF, which is the same number of agents since 1970. They say they want to stop gun trafficking. Well then, appoint a permanent ATF director, which the agency hasn't had in 6 years. They say they want to stop gun trafficking. Well then, let's pass some laws which actually deter straw purchasers. Straw purchasers can currently buy thousands of AK-47s, lie on their paperwork, and the penalty is equivalent to a moving violation. They say they want to stop gun trafficking. Well then, let's give the agents the field what they've been asking for, the ability to track multiple purchases of long guns. These long guns include AK-47s, variant assault weapons, and 50 caliber semi-automatic sniper rifles, the weapons of choice for international drug cartels. They say they want to stop gun trafficking. Well then, let's close the gun show loophole, which currently allows anyone to purchase any gun they want without a background check. Felons, domestic violence abusers, those with severe mental illness, even those on the terrorist watch list can currently walk into a gun show and purchase any gun they want. Yes, 2,000 guns were allowed to walk to Mexico, but the truth is tens of thousands of guns flow across our border every year because of those lax gun laws. But those bringing this contempt vote don't want to have this conversation, and they aren't serious about stopping gun trafficking. They simply want to embarrass the administration, even though the committee's 16-month investigation found no evidence the Attorney General knew about gun walking, and even though there was no evidence of the White House involvement in gun walking, all of which Chairman Issa admitted on national TV last week. So if we're going to talk about gun trafficking, let's be clear. This is about politics, not safety. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, the minority knows that, in fact, this contempt is all about the Attorney General's refusal to turn over documents, not whether or not it was his lieutenants or he that personally was involved in Fast and Furious. With that, I'd like to recognize the distinguished former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Sensenbrenner, for 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this isn't about politics. This is about the Constitution, and it's about Congress's mandate to do oversight over both the executive and judicial branches of government. The President is asserting executive privilege to attempt to shield these documents, and he is relying on a type of privilege called the deliberative process privilege. However, that privilege disappears when Congress is investigating evidence of wrongdoing. And in 1997, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit wrote in part, "Moreover, the privilege disappears altogether when there is any reason to believe that government misconduct has occurred." In another case that was decided by the First Circuit in 1995, it says that the grounds that shielding internal government deliberations in this context does not serve the public interest in honest, effective government. There has been misconduct that's already a matter of public record in 2 instances. The Justice Department wrote Senator Grassley in January of 2011 saying that the ATF sanctioned gun walking across the border was false. And it took them 9 months to retract that letter. So they misled Congress, and then 9 months later they said, oops, maybe we did mislead Congress and we'll withdraw the letter. And in May 2011, the Attorney General testified before the Judiciary Committee that he first heard of Operation Fast and Furious a few weeks before the hearing. Over 6 months later, he conceded that he should have said a few months. Now, this very clearly shows that Congress has got the obligation to get to the bottom of this, and that the assertion of executive privilege by the President and the Attorney General is not based in law. We ought to go ahead and do our job and do our oversight, and it's too bad that the Justice Department has decided to try to obstruct Congress's ability to do it. Pass the resolution.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield to the gentleman and member of the committee, Mr. Connolly of Virginia, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the 112th Congress is on the verge of becoming the first in the history of the country to hold a sitting cabinet member in contempt, cementing its legacy as the most partisan House of Representatives perhaps of all time. When they say it's not about politics, you can be sure it's about politics. The majority's irresponsible and unprecedented contempt vote brings dishonor to this House, which has become so clouded in judgment, so besotted with rancor and partisanship that it's incapable of addressing a fundamental separation of powers conflict in a serious and fair fashion. In refusing to engage in good faith negotiations with the Department of Justice and the Attorney General, the majority has exposed this contempt citation for what it really is, an extraordinarily shameful political witch hunt aimed at trashing an honorable man. It's unacceptable. We're rushing to the floor this unprecedented contempt resolution. Yesterday, Ranking Member Cummings sent a letter to the Speaker highlighting 100 errors, omissions, mischaracterizations of fact contained in the contempt citation itself, rushed out of our committee last week on a party line vote. Although some of the contempt citation's flaws are simply misleading, others are significant legal deficiencies and may contain factual errors that call into question the very validity of the contempt citation itself. For example, on pages 4 and 5, the contempt citation charges senior officials at the Department of Justice headquarters ultimately approved and authorized Operation Fast and Furious. However, the contempt citation fails to mention the committee has uncovered no evidence that DOJ officials, including the Attorney General, ever approved or authorized gun walking in Operation Fast and Furious. In fact, the authorization originated in the ATF office in Phoenix, Arizona, not at DOJ headquarters in Washington. On pages 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 25, 26, and 27, the contempt citation charges DOJ with not producing a series of documents that the chairman only recently acknowledged the department is prohibited by law from providing due to the potential impact on ongoing prosecutions. In fact, I would ask the gentleman for an extra 20 seconds.
I yield the gentleman an extra 15 seconds.
In fact, he had to amend his own subpoenas to delete documents in this very category, but his contempt citation has not caught up with his most recent version of his subpoena. Clearly, the majority has not taken the necessary time to properly weigh this very serious charge. Regrettably, this deeply flawed and shoddy contempt citation is emblematic of the majority's reckless rush to judgment throughout this political prosecution. I've been deeply troubled by the tone and tenor of some of the very hostile questioning and the utter and complete contempt and lack of respect given to the Attorney General of the United States. When this chapter of congressional history is written, it will be not a brave, shining moment. It will be seen for what it is, a craven, crass, partisan move that brings dishonor to this body, and I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California.
I now yield 1 minute to the very distinguished and very always participating member of the committee from New York, Ms. Burkle.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the chairman for his steadfast work on behalf of truth and trying to get to the bottom of Fast and Furious. Mr. Speaker, Syracuse, New York, in the heart of my district, is roughly 2,500 miles from Rico, Arizona, where U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was tragically shot and killed by an AK-47 assault rifle that the United States
knowingly allowed into the hands of a suspected gun trafficker. Yet every time I'm home, it is the issue first and foremost on the minds of my constituents. I listen to their calls, to their emails at our town halls. They want to know what happened, who knew what, and when did they know it. They ask me, they ask Washington, they ask the Department of Justice, how could the United States government, the pillar of hope and freedom, allowed for this, for one of their own representatives, one of their own good guys, to be so helplessly gunned down by a suspected criminal? Mr. Speaker, I'm embarrassed to say that after 562 days, I still don't have an answer for them.
Time the gentlelady has.
May I have one more minute?
I yield the gentlelady an additional 10 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 10 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, I ask, is this the hope that the Americans were supposed to believe in? Out of the supposedly most transparent government in the history of our nation. It is my hope, Mr. Speaker, that the district court judge will see through the Attorney General's contempt of Congress after it is passed in the House today. However, we must not be mistaken that even if the Attorney General is prosecuted, the case is not closed. We must not forget that guns leaked through this program.
Time the gentlelady has expired.
Do I have another minute?
I'd yield the gentlelady an additional 10 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, after today's vote, we must continue our efforts to find more answers than there are questions relating to this administration's catastrophic Fast and Furious. The American people deserve to know those answers, and the family of Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry as well. Thank you. I yield back.
Time the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
I yield the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay, 2 minutes, a member of the committee.
Gentleman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, as a member of the Oversight Committee, I know that the gun-walking operations conducted by the ATF under both the previous and current administrations were absolutely wrong. But the leadership of this House is focused on shameful election year political posturing instead of the real issue. The Justice Department long ago ended the practice of allowing these guns to walk across the border, putting communities in Mexico at great risk. But the same people who have relentlessly pursued a baseless partisan attack on Attorney General Holder and the President have ignored the desperate pleas of the Mexican government to strengthen American gun laws and curb the gun trafficking that gave rise to the strategy in the first place. But focusing on the real issue would take time away from their playing politics with the oversight authority. Those on the other side of the aisle claim to be concerned about powerful assault weapons crossing the border into Mexico illegally. But how can they be completely fine with those same powerful assault weapons being sold right here in this country legally, putting our communities at even greater risk? This is nothing more than a political witch hunt. The disgraceful posturing that I have witnessed at last week's markup has been continued on the floor today. I agree that it never should have come to this, but we are here debating this resolution solely because of the majority. They created the scandal and produced a showdown during an election season just to smear an honorable, dedicated public servant and to embarrass his boss. I urge my colleagues to reject this nakedly partisan, unprecedented abuse.
Time the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's now my honor to yield 1 minute to the distinguished Speaker of the House, John Boehner.
The gentleman from Ohio, the Speaker of the House, is recognized.
I want to thank my colleague for yielding. It's important for the American people to know how we got here and to know the facts of this case. The Congress asked the Justice Department for the facts related to the Fast and Furious in the events that led to the death of U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry. The Justice Department did not provide the facts and the information that we requested. Instead, the information came from people outside the department, people who wanted to do the right thing. In addition to not providing the information, the administration admitted misleading Congress, actually retracting a letter it had sent 10 months earlier. I think all the members understand this is a very serious matter. The Terry family wants to know how this happened, and they have every right to have their answers. And the House needs to know how this happened. And it's our constitutional duty to find out. So the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee issued a lawful and narrowly tailored subpoena. We've been patient, given the Justice Department every opportunity to comply so that we can get to the bottom of this for the Terry family. We've shown more than enough good faith, but the White House has chosen to invoke executive privilege. That leaves us no other options. The only recourse left for the House is to continue seeking the truth and to hold Attorney General in contempt of Congress. Now, I don't take this matter lightly, and I would frankly hope it would never come to this. The House's focus is on jobs and on the economy. But no Justice Department is above the law, and no Justice Department is above the Constitution, which each of us has sworn an oath to uphold. So I ask the members of this body to come together and to support this resolution so that we can seek the answers that the Terry family and the American people deserve. I yield back.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Maryland.
Let me just say before Mr. Lynch, I yield myself 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I want to say in response to the Speaker, we too are all saddened by the tragic death of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry, who gave his life service to his country on December 15, 2010. But, Mr. Speaker, despite what my colleagues have claimed, this contempt vote is not about getting documents that show how gun walking was initiated and utilized in Operation Fast and Furious. Now, the only documents in dispute are documents created after Fast and Furious ended and after Brian Terry's death. But we pledge to continue to find all the answers with regard to the death of Brian Terry. With that, I yield the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, 2 minutes. Member of the committee.
The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would add that we had 31 Democrats that signed a letter to the Department of Justice and to the White House in the aftermath of Agent Terry's death to fully cooperate in this investigation. However, I rise in strong opposition to this contempt resolution. While criticism of the Department of Justice for oversight of the so-called gun-walking operations conducted during both the Bush administration and the current administration, criticism may be warranted, a finding of contempt against the sitting Attorney General of the United States is most certainly not. In determining whether this House should hold our highest-ranking national law enforcement officer in contempt of Congress, let us remember that up until last week, the majority of our committee had been demanding the production of documents that our Attorney General is legally prohibited from disclosing. And that has caused much of the delay here. In other words, Mr. Holder would have broken the law and likely compromised existing criminal prosecutions if he adhered to the majority's unreasonable request for materials related to ongoing criminal investigations, federal wiretap communications, and under judicial seal, and documents also subject to grand jury secrecy rules. Let us also be mindful that we are considering the extent of cooperation or non-cooperation of an Attorney General who has appeared before Congress on 9 separate occasions, whose Justice Department has produced over 7,600 pages of documents, to oversight investigators and who continues to offer significant accommodations in response to extraordinary and ever-changing requests for information. Meanwhile, the majority continues to deny any and all Democratic requests to publicly question under oath law enforcement officials, including former director of the ATF, Ken Melson, the head of the very agency that ran the gun-walking operations such as Fast and Furious. Accordingly, it's become quite clear that what began as a legitimate and compelling oversight committee investigation into Operation Fast and Furious has deteriorated into an unfortunate example.
Gentleman, another 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
In closing, I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to oppose this contempt resolution, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back his time. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Wahlberg.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Speaker. There is no joy in today's action. But the fact remains, 18 months after U.S. Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered, the Justice Department has failed to hold anybody accountable for the mistakes of Operation Fast and Furious. As a member of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee, I have witnessed firsthand the stonewalling by the Department of Justice and Attorney General Holder. At every question, the Justice Department has refused to acknowledge what they know about the gun-walking tactics that led to Agent Terry's death. Most recently, they have hid behind the President's erroneous claims of executive privilege, an action the President denounced as lacking transparency when he was campaigning. The Department has stood in open defiance of Congress's moral and constitutional obligation to conduct oversight of this affair. The family of Agent Terry deserves to know who approved Fast and Furious. They have the right to know who had the power to stop this program before he was murdered. And they need an explanation as to why the Department of Justice took 9 months to withdraw their false denial that they had ever let gun walk to Mexico. To some on the other side of this aisle.
The time of the gentleman has expired.
30 seconds. I yield the gentleman an additional 15 seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 15 seconds.
To some on the other side of the aisle, it seems fine that the people who authorize this operation still work within the Department of Justice. I don't agree. They'd rather play politics than uphold Congress's right to investigate. Today's vote is about accountability. It's about making sure another 2,000 firearms don't end up in the hands of Mexican drug cartels. And it's about bringing closure to the Terry family. I urge my colleagues to support this resolution and honor the memory of Brian Terry.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Gentleman from Maryland.
Speaker, I yield to the distinguished gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer, 4 minutes.
The gentleman from Maryland, the minority whip, is recognized for 4 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, this is a sad day for the House of Representatives. It is an irresponsible day for the House of Representatives. It is a day in which the majority party asks us to take an action that has never been taken in the history of America. Never once. Holding a cabinet officer in contempt of the Congress. Now, there have been previous contempt citations, some promoted by Democratic committees and some promoted by Republican committees. The average time between committee action and consideration on the floor of this House is 87 days. Time to reflect on an extraordinarily important action with consequences beyond the knowledge of anybody sitting here today. Now, I want to tell the chairman with all due respect, I think this investigation has been extraordinarily superficial. I think the chairman has failed to call witnesses that could in fact give relevant, cogent testimony on the issues to bear. That ought to be done. That is why I will strongly support the motion of the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, who has served here longer than any of the rest of us, and who is one of the strongest gun control rights supporters in this Congress. And what his motion says is, let us reflect. Let us bring thoughtful judgment. Let us not, every time that there is the opportunity, to choose confrontation over cooperation and consensus. That has been the history of this Congress. Confrontation over consensus every time. And America is suffering because of it. I ask my friends on the Republican side of the aisle who know me to be a bipartisan member of this body that believes in this institution and who cares about its actions and the precedent they will set. Don't do this. Vote for this motion to refer. Give the chairman the opportunity he should have taken before to have a full hearing, calling former Attorney General McCaskey, calling the former head of the ATF, calling agents who were personally involved in this proceeding. I venture to say that there are very few members who will vote on this issue who have read the committee proceedings. Very few members who have read the minority report or the majority report. Yet they are about to take a historic vote to do what has never been done by any Congress. 111 Congresses did not take this action. This is not about Republicans or Democrats. This is about our Constitution, our country, our respect for a nation of laws, not of men. That's what this vote is about. We ought not to be voting as Republicans and Democrats. We ought to be voting as Americans. Americans committed to justice and fair process. I regret that I do not believe this committee has followed that. I believe that the political motivations behind this resolution are clear and pose a clear and present danger to this nation. I have 30 additional seconds.
Grant the gentleman 30 additional seconds.
The gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
I want to thank the gentleman from Maryland, my colleague and my friend, for his leadership on this effort. When we vote on